Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, folks. Welcome to a PITO webinar. The title just got me. As soon as it was suggested, I thought, yeah, this is something I'd love to get involved with. And then I had to think about the people I would bring to this. So delighted on grow up, get along, and get stuff done. That sounds like my brand in a lot of ways, or the lack of brand in terms of what I do in those. But I'm joined today by Liane Davey, who is a regular on our webinars. Liane, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a second. I've got Ella Benur, a new person to my life, but a brilliant person to add in, who's going to add huge value today, and Marcus Degerman, today. So the four of us are going to take you through content around this grow up, get along, get stuff done. But let's do some intros first. Marcus, do you want to go first?
Okay, Marcus Degerman. I'm the co-founder of Incredible Mess, and I'm also the author of Solve Problems Together. And what we usually say, we work with helping organizations work with their incredible mess instead of against it. So not getting stuck trying to clean things up, but basically realizing everything is messy at the moment, and we just need to be able to manage that better.
We could just start there, Marcus, and just go from there. That's great. Leave it messy and get on with it. Yeah, so that's good. Ella, do you want to go next? Because you come from a slightly different angle, but maybe an intro first. Yeah.
Sure. My name is Ella, and my background is from 13 years working at the design firm IDEO, and in my, I guess, about a decade since, just seeing that all of our challenges are connected, from our very personal ones to our organizational and societal ones. And it turns out that our ways of unsticking a lot of those challenges are also connected, from design thinking to a lot of other things I've had the privilege to work with. And so my work, innovatorscompass.org, is about making our best ways of getting unstuck accessible for every person and moment. And I look forward to spending some time together today.
Great. Thanks, Ella. So mess, getting unstuck. Liane, how are you going to top that? Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I am, but that's the fun of being the host. You can just have the guests be the impressive ones, right? So hello, Liane Davey. And by way of background, I have a PhD in organizational psychology. And so my mission in life is to help people achieve amazing things together. So I get into all of the messiness, for sure, particularly messiness of team dynamics and all that good stuff. So I am so excited to be with this group. I have so much to learn today, and thanks for making it happen, Colin.
No, my pleasure. And for those who don't know me, Colin Hunter, CEO of PotentialSquared, and I'm playing host and hosting these three folks to talk about the topic today. But I want to come back to the grow up, get along, and get stuff done, because Liane, you have accountability for coining that. I'd love us to just put a context around those three buckets for us at the beginning of this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So to tell you where it comes from, it's actually the subtitle of my first book. So the title of the book is You First, but the subtitle, I was searching for a subtitle to take a book that's about teamwork, but yet called You First, and say, what's the link there? And so the subtitle was, inspire your team to grow up, get along, and get stuff done. And since I published the book in, 2013, I've realized that I didn't realize when I was creating the subtitle that what I was really doing is creating a framework for my career. But essentially that's what I was doing, in saying that first we have to do our own work. We have to grow up. We have to become more self-aware. We need to, choose to behave in uncomfortable and difficult ways. Then we need to figure out how to get along. If we can take all of our mess, and if we come to it at least owning our own piece of the puzzle, we can get along more effectively, listen more effectively, empathize, that sort of thing. And if we can get that figured out, we have a hope of getting something meaningful done, that we can build systems and create alignment and be productive and that sort of thing. So those three layers to me have become really about understanding that organizations are systems. And if we don't understand the individual factors, the team and dynamic factors, and then some of those more structural or large group factors, we're going nowhere. So I just think it's amazing we've assembled this sort of ideal group to give us insight at each of those levels today.
That'd be brilliant. So we are going to take the three levels. But Ella, when you first saw the title, because this was given to you, what were your first thoughts in terms of how you fit into this? Yeah.
Interesting. I think that as I just mentioned in the introduction, that I likewise see that there's, everything kind of starts at ourselves and moves outward, and that we can get stuck in a lot of different places along the way there. And it's so interesting. I think Marcus and I are both going to really debate what we mean by growing up, because I think that in each of those things, whether it's our own work or getting along or getting stuff done, a lot of, like, my experience first, working at IDEO, and since started out really working with executives and leaders and professional teams. And then I started working in education as well, and realizing, oh my God, I'm getting paid really good money to reteach things that little kids are born with. And so I don't know, but I wonder if some of what I'll be helping to share today from my own perspective is just what are those things that we discover, that we unleash, that are still buried down deep within inside us, that are actually part of growing up, but not just like growing up in the stereotypical way that we think, like, shut down everything and just like get things done. Right? It's not a fast forward from grow up and just get things done. It's a lot of the things that we're born with that can help us at each of those stages that we just didn't get a chance to develop and mature as our challenges got more complicated, but it's in there, and I know that we can unstick ourselves so that we can unstick our teams and our organizations.
I love that, because it is. We could spend probably the whole time on the grow up piece. There's a great podcast, the High Performance Podcast, that talks about the ghost of your childhood echoing or rattling around in your current adult body. And there are a lot of things that we could go to that are still rattling around, that cause us almost to get stuck or to cause us mess around us. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. So Marcus, thoughts?
When I started first, it took me a while to just put everything together, what it actually meant. But thinking about my own work, I usually come into an organization when they say, we need to get more stuff done, or we're not getting any stuff done. And then usually when we take a step back and talk about it, look, it means that we need to get along more. So how do we collaborate better? But what you also usually realize in the end, that there's usually few individuals who hasn't grown up, or have basically grown up a bit too much, takes themselves a bit too seriously and a bit too professionally. So they can't fail, and they are a bit too much of a specialist in their work. And that makes it very hard to get along and get stuff done if you need to work in a team. So I think that is my thought on how I connect this in my head.
Love that. And I'll just add my tuppence worth, as we say over here, to that, which is, there's this great article recently on what is the word professional. And people say, you got to grow up, you got to be more professional. Whereas I probably spend most of my time trying to get people to undo that professionalism, whatever they think is the right way to operate to get stuff done. And currently we're talking about 75% people stuck in their careers. There's the data behind it. Secondly, you've got the net promoter score for a lot of organizations going down because people want to express themselves more, the great migration and other pieces. And the third thing is that people say, it's interesting because it's this clash between freedom to act and sense of direction. 75% and increasing think that organizations are unprepared for the future. So there's 3 dimensions. So this could get very messy, very complex, but hopefully we'll be able to get unstuck with it. Liane, do you want to come back? It was your title, your thoughts? Yeah. Let's lead in with the grow up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just listening to Ella and Marcus, just those early comments. I'm so excited, and I know that we're going to need a follow up, because there's not going to be enough time to get all the richness of how they think about it. And I love the introduction of both, I think from each of the 3 of you, of this idea that some of grow up is actually not about be more stiff, be more invulnerable, be more artificial, but it's actually grow up in the sense of, and actually I'm just releasing a YouTube video this week about how to deal with it when you're in a conflict on your team and your emotions hijack you. What do you do? And in that video, I'm saying part of growing up is understanding that humans have emotions, it's okay. Professionals have emotions, but the grow up part is, what do I do when that happens? So I'm talking about how, the grown up person acknowledges it instead of pretending that tears aren't welling up in their eyes. They just say, okay, well, you can see that this is, struck a chord for me. Or the grown up person gives people the insight about what's actually going on in their heads. Or so I just love that we're already into this definition of what does grow up mean. And I think we could stay there for a few minutes, and I would love to. So Ella, I'd love to hear more from you about what you see as some of the things that in some ways we have to do this sort of arc of, we grew up, we learned some really good things and some not very useful things. What do you see are the key unlearnings that we need to, what are the unlearnings you're most excited about taking out to the world?
Yeah, it reminds me, my daughter loves the Yoda quote, "You must unlearn what you have learned," right? We all love that. And I think for me, I often put things through the lens of Innovators Compass, these 5 questions, these 5 ways that individuals, organizations, societies get stuck, because it's those that we want to tackle, right? We want to go straight to the core of the ways that we get stuck and unstuck. And I think that we can bring with us and adapt with us the things from our childhood that can really help us there. And as you said, layer on some other abilities. So first of all, just people, when you're a young child, it is clear that you are dependent and perhaps, codependent on other people. And then we get older and we don't bring people into our circle as much, right? We can do this. It's me. It's, we kind of close up. And so that drawing on that clear seeing and seeing our dependencies on other people, and as an adult, seeing our codependence. So that's how I think that evolves. Can evolve if we grow up in a new way. And then another way that we get stuck is not really seeing or owning, let us say, what is happening and why, whether it's in our lives, in our work, in our world. And kids are insanely observant, right? It takes an hour to walk a block with a small child, and they're asking why over and over again, and they're trying to wrap their heads around it, and they're just like observation monsters, right? And so for us to be able to tap back into that curiosity and turn it inward to our own self-awareness, as well as outward about the world and about what's happening between us, I think is really powerful, right? Being able to take perspective. That's the things that we have to grow as we grow up, because that, you don't get born with that part. And then being able to see, oh my gosh, all this stuff that's happening, we as adults get to see a lot more happening in the world. We get a little more overwhelmed. So we have to be able to grow our ability to see what matters most, right? To kids, it's really clear. I am hungry right now. I can't do that because I'm hungry. And then when we're older, we shut that down. You're not realizing that it actually matters to take care of ourselves before something else, or just being able to, see what matters most. That ability needs to be able to grow with us as well. Kids can draw the thing that matters most to them, but we can't when we get older. So how do we see that clarity? And then, we can then get stuck knowing what matters to us and seeing no ways or just one way to make it happen. And kids, this is cliche, right? Kids are the dreamers. Yeah, we could bring in 1,000 elephants. Why not? My birthday party, right? And so that ability to just see a whole different who, what, when, where, how, they don't know a one way. They were born with none, right? So they don't see any limits. And so for us to be able to bring that to the bigger, more pressure-filled problems, it's very hard to do that as stuff gets tougher, as things get messier, right, Marcus? And then finally, you can get stuck with lots of ideas and then no action. And so kids, right, again, cliche, they try stuff without fear of failure before we instill it in them very handily. And so, can we just the same as our kids do with their blocks, the thing falls down, they build high, they let it fall, and they figure out how to build it better next time, right? Can we be just, it's scarier, the stakes are higher. Yep, as we get older, they are. But can we grow to step back from those stakes, make things, to find a small, safe experiment that we can always do so that we're not scared to take a step. And then again, own what happens and why for everyone involved, like a big kid.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool, this idea that we need to think of this maturation process as being one where it's two phases. It's all the things we add, and then we reach a point. And I just had my 50th birthday, so maybe I feel very strongly about that point where we then strip away a bunch of what we learned that we need to unlearn. Marcus, when you were talking about what I loved about how you described the three was you started with the get stuff done, which of course is what many of our executive clients, they start there, right? And we just need to get more stuff done. Do you find that you have to make a compelling case that it's not just about continually driving productivity, that you have to actually get into the mess and the mess of the interactions and then the mess of our own psyches? Like, do you have to, help make the case backwards from the get stuff done all the way to the grow up piece?
In some cases, but usually if they come and talk to me, it's usually because they have realized, some comes, okay, we want to become more agile or adaptive, or our teams are not producing as much as they should, but they still have the realization of that they need to do something. But then what I've noticed is that many have this learned thing that they've learned that they should push. It's good to kind of raise the stakes and say, this is extremely important, we need to succeed here. And that what I noticed that might be detrimental as well, because usually we should kind of, okay, it's not the end of the world, we need to try this. And when what you said, Ella, about, so the stakes get higher, but I don't think that they get as high as we think. In our heads, usually if we fail, it will be the end of the world, but usually it's not. And I think usually I talk about this scale between failing and falling, and then also jumping off. I like this skateboarding metaphor. So I started skateboarding 4 years ago with my then 4-year-old. And it was this kind of fun experience of learning this, but also realizing that you fall all the time and you jump off all the time, but you don't hurt yourself. To getting this realization in, and also how can we actually set things up so that we fall all the time, realize this was a bad idea, let's stop it, and not pushing so far that we get to that this was a big failure, that kind of with the stakes too high. And I think that also comes into Ella's Innovator's Compass, when testing, experimenting, and getting that mindset in. And that also comes into this growing up and taking ourselves a bit too seriously. This is the most important thing. And then we ask the questions, okay, but is it? And what really happens if we fail here? And realize it's okay. That I think is important.
It's so interesting because I watched with my kids, we watched the skateboarding in the Olympics when it was for the first time ever in the Olympics. And I did notice how profoundly different the culture was around the sport, and just watching people celebrate when people tried something interesting and either jumped off or fell off. And it wasn't like in every other Olympic thing where it would be the, they fell. It was like, oh, right. Like, awesome, good ride or whatever. And so it is interesting to wonder how we create organizational cultures more like skateboarding culture and less like figure skating culture, which just seems so uptight, tightly wound all the time. So, all right, Colin, that's some pretty cool thoughts. Why don't you finish off on grow up, and then you can take us on to the next piece.
So I think what was interesting, a couple of things are going through my mind. Jamie Smart always talked about falling out of your own thinking as an adult. And he always talked about this analogy at the beginning of your life as a child, Ella, going to this, where your mind is a self-correcting system. You can be laughing, fighting with your friends in the split second. But as we grow older, we get frozen thinking. So by the time we get to, dare I say, 40, 50, there's almost just a trickle of consciousness in your mind. And we are so beholden to things that we've learned and driven that actually a lot of the work is to try fall out of your own thinking. And when you ask the question, where do you get your best ideas? To your point, it's when you were switched off your mind working. So I think there's something in there about growing up it's a counterintuitive, because actually what we're asking people to do is go back to release some of their thinking, some of their consciousness in there. Second thing for me is that if you think about where we are in the business world at the moment with hybrid, we think about everything with the Great Migration, people are so hung up about how they've always operated that even a small experiment of changing something small, whether it's interacting with clients or other things, is so huge to them because they've either been successful or the risk is massive for what they're doing. But what we're finding a lot in that moment is that a lot of leaders who are taking small experiments, low risk, are the ones who are being successful in this current environment, particularly around engagement. So I think it's interesting. It's almost, how do you grow up to be more like yourself? Yeah. And go back to your original thoughts in there, which is probably a mixture of what you were saying there in the end, but that's what was coming through in there. So I love it. So I want to go into the get along, because, you know, in the great book, David Brooks talks about the second mountain. He talks about the first mountain in your career being very individualistic, where you're focused on your own self, your own driven way of doing things. And as you hinted before, all three of you, once you get to the second part of your life, there's this bit, realize the individualistic gets you very little in terms of getting on with other people and getting stuff done. So Liane, I'm going to come to you to start with on this, because they're getting the psychologist background around the team, just to maybe nail this down, maybe taking the second man, because I'm not sure of the age profile we've got on here, but I'm sure there's quite a few people going, you know, I've done so well up to now, but people are giving me a leadership responsibility. What the hell do I do now? Yeah. So.
Yeah, the line that keeps coming up to me, and I don't know, it's proverb, right? That if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Nice. And one of the things that makes me profoundly sad about the corporate world, and I primarily work in corporate North America, although with lots of global companies, but everybody just chooses to go fast almost all the time. And at their peril, and I think in ways that reduce the effectiveness of the solutions, you know, et cetera, but just, we seem to choose go alone, because then I can go fast. So I think, you know, what I'm naturally attracted to is the kind of vexatious problems that you can't solve on your own. You can't even begin. And I think that's why I've always thought IDEO was such an amazing place. I always was so, you know, envious of that organization, was that's just baked in from the whole, you know, original concept, is that, you know, we have to see this through different lenses. We have to understand from different stakeholders' vantage points, you know, all these sorts of things. So, you know, I think that's what's sad for me, is corporations are so obsessed with the monthly numbers, not even quarterly anymore, like the monthly numbers. And that is causing people to end up, you know, just trying to go alone. Morton Hansen had a book out, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago now. If it's BC, if it's before COVID, I don't know the year anymore. It's just before COVID. And essentially, he showed the data that showed, although we talk a good game about how the most important people in organizations are these influencers and these collaborators, his data showed, no, absolutely not. The real high performers, the people who are rated highly, evaluated positively in the 9 box, they're all just thoroughbreds, blinders on, running fast in their lane. And they'll tell you right out, don't do too much cooperating with other departments. That'll slow you down. You won't get credit for it. And it was so demoralizing to read that. It's not that I didn't have a sense that that was the truth, but to see the data behind it. So, you know, I think our you know, our publicly traded companies, our culture of monthly results is causing so many of us to not try and get along, to just reward the people who move fast, break things, break people. So I'm not feeling especially positive on that factor at the moment. And maybe Marcus or Ella will feel more positive, or maybe we'll all agree that this is something we have got to fix.
I want to go to Ella. I mean, I remember watching Tim Brown speak, and we were talking about design thinking. We were talking about who's I think he's chair now of IDEO. I can't remember his title now, but he, you know, he wrote the book on design thinking, and he led that organization for a number of years. And he talked about, I asked the question, which was, we do design thinking, they take design thinking, they get back to their organizations and it fails. Yeah. Why does it fail? And he says the one thing, if he could have a magic wand to do, is to turn organizations into a series of projects of people collaborating, working in that space. But I'd love to get your thoughts from the IDEO and your background around what you do around that topic, because that's my experience. Get a team together, get a finite project, deliver, people will do it. But the wider organization struggles within the constructs that we've just been talking about with Liane. Thoughts?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because once you're in a project scale, the more human scale, right, as opposed to like our corporate strategy, So I think that might be one reason for it. And also, all of this aside, especially in today's world, it is hard to have a 10-year strategy, right? That's one argument for the shorter projects. And as I was listening and thinking about IDEO before you even brought it up, I think, so you mentioned, I've actually not heard that, go, if you want to go fast, go solo. And if you want to go far, go together. But it tied to me to going fast to go slow, right? That is ultimately, it's hard when you see those numbers, right? But we still have to believe that going solo is going fast to go slow. The numbers look good, and long term, your organization crumbles or something else. So, and fundamentally, so I just like to go super micro for a moment, the way that projects got put together for IDEO. You could imagine, like, let's put together a bunch of people who kind of are similar to be on this project team, but it was always like, okay, let's get one of these and one of these and one of these, both by discipline, like, okay, I'm an interaction, well, I'm not, but this person's an interaction designer, this person's, a design researcher and strategist like me, or, different disciplines, but also just different people, right? I just love the amazing different characters. And I think that in that moment, on that micro scale, it's a valuation for each human being and what they bring. And I think it's not being, selfless and lack of self-confidence, or being like my way or the highway, but it's this recognition that whether it's a project or the future of this company, the best thing is going to happen if everyone is delivering their best. And so working for that collective potential, maybe that's potential squared. That's what that means. And so, as a project leader there, for me, it was a lot about how do I ensure that everybody is able to release that potential they have in them, that, some people need to all work together in a room for a long time. Some people need some space to themselves, whether it's, dynamics like that or anything else that brings out the best in each person and helps us all sort of gather the observations, the ideas, right? The principles, get all hands on deck for these experiments. What really enables that to happen. So I think that valuing those different people, their contributions, and then thinking about how it's easier at a project scale, but at any scale, to bring them together for the greatest good, and to believe that is going slow to go fast, and even going fast to go fast. All hands on deck, right? Like many hands make light the work. Those are Proverbs too.
Yep. We could have a webinar on Proverbs. I love it though, because there's two things going through. One is breaking your echo chamber. So getting people who are different into the room. And, that's something I learned from you, Liane, and the work we did on LinkedIn and talking to different people. But the other thing is leaving your ego and expertise at the door. The role of the leader always about, growing up was to have the answers, whereas now it's not. It's to facilitate other people with diverse points of views coming together, leaving your ego and expertise at the door and allowing others to shine. So I love that in terms of the idea.
And I just want to say both, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not about, I think it's also not about completely pulling out. You as a leader, they're all people, right? For like in Innovators Compass, we're just all people at the same, we all have our own experiences and expertise in bringing it together. And to just really briefly add one other thing is those feelings, there's a heart in the middle of the people, in the middle of Innovators Compass, and to use them as our superpowers and to recognize this is really important as we think about including lots of different people who express emotion different ways and use it in different ways, to realize that emotions are actually one of our superpowers, and to help everybody harness that in a productive way.
Yeah.
So probably while we hear from Marcus, maybe Ellie, you can look in the questions. Brian just asked a great question, and maybe you could take a look at Brian's question and give him an answer think about it while we hear from Marcus.
I'm going to continue on the kind of expert track, because I think organizations are addicted to having a lot of experts. Kind of say, oh, this person has worked 10 years on this. We need to have him in this meeting, or her. And this is 15 years of experience. We need to bring in those thoughts as well. And what's scary is then when that person retires or quits for another job, and then they realize that they have not thought about how to spread that knowledge, and they panic. But what usually also they notice that after 1 or 2 months, it usually works anyway. They weren't that type of experts as well. But what I find is very difficult is how you work with those super experts in a team when you bring them in. So how do you both give them time to teach, but also help them to kind of dare to do that, because they are the experts. That is kind of how they see themselves. That is why they have their job. So if they start spreading that kind of knowledge, then is their value diminishing? And it's kind of difficult to go from the expert to maybe expert as a teacher to spread that knowledge as well. And I think that is one of the difficult parts of getting along. And
that was so juicy, Marcus. There's so much goodness in that. You know, it makes me think of a couple of things. Ron Heifetz's work on technical versus adaptive challenges, and how experts are great at solving yesterday's problems, but perhaps get in the way in solving tomorrow's, right? And then Liz Wiseman, who has many great books, but I love her book Rookie Smarts, for saying we need the balance of the non-experts and the people who don't know that something is impossible, for all that has been created in the world by the people who don't know that it's impossible. So that idea has got many things percolating for me. You know, where do you see the big benefit of experts, and where do you see the things that experts really can detract from, you know, great solutions or decisiveness, or like, what are the pros and cons you see of experts?
I like the experts who has the holistic kind of view, because when they have their experience, they've seen so much, and when they're focused on the overall picture and how things connect, then they are really valuable, because they will, when they sit down with the team, they will say, oh, you need to talk to these people as well. Oh, you need to think about how you will connect to this. You need to think about these kind of connections. So it's more of how the team interacts to other teams and other solutions. So it actually fits into the whole. And I think it's detrimental when the expert is within the team and working within the team, because then even if someone else does something, they will directly comment out, give negative feedback. Oh, you should have done it this way instead. So even if they say, oh, you do this, you know that they will do it themselves anyway in the end, and people won't dare to give any kind of good solution to the team, because they will just ask more and more questions of this, because they know that if they don't do it exactly as that expert wants it, then they will just need to redo it till the end. So
one of the things that I work on with teams is helping teams at different levels understand whether they're supposed to be answering the why questions, the what questions, or the how questions. And I think maybe where experts often get it wrong is they spend a lot of time answering the how questions, which is constraining, and they don't spend enough time helping through that expertise and experience to answer the why questions. So, you know, that might be useful for folks. I find when I say to a team, you know, this team or this level in the organization or this meeting is all about answering why questions or who questions, they kind of get that. And then all of a sudden they'll start answering a how question, and they'll be able to self-monitor and be like, oh, we've slid into the how question. So you know, I never thought about the why, the what, and the how with reference to expertise before, but just trying to think, if you could get amazing experts helping to frame more effectively the why questions, answer the why questions, that might be much more useful and less constraining than when they get into answering all the how. Cool.
I really like that model. And it makes a lot of sense to kind of think, how do you kind of raise the kind of level of abstraction when you talk to the experts? So I like that one.
It builds on Michael Bungie-Stanier's question about what you want, that coaching, what you want, because it takes you up a level. It's the strategic question. I think he talks about what you want in there. So
I remember where hows came from. Like I remember, you know, design thinking has kind of came out in the 13 years that I was at IDEO, and it was those why questions, like design researchers really wanted to find out what was happening and why for people. That was why they were going out into the field, and they weren't getting the right answers. And so they came up with what is now like the book 101 Design Methods and the Method Deck and all these things. Like those were just people who were like finding hows because they had the why inside them. And so if you just like spark the why inside people, you will be surprised. They will come up with hows you didn't.
Yes.
Which is amazing. And
then they'll feel so empowered and so engaged, right? But when first of all, when I find we do the opposite, we don't answer the why questions. And case in point, right now, the way that leaders are botching the return to office, they're not answering any of the why questions. and they're dictating the how answers. And you're like, oh, wrong, like backwards.
Yeah.
Turn the crank and do a lot of how and actually never get to the why. Really briefly, I'm really glad that you brought up HiFITS and adaptive leadership.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of why all this happens is because of, the fear, right? Like fear is the underlying mechanism of adaptive leadership, right? Like it's what makes us do or not do. Fear of loss in particular is what they focus on. And, for a leader in this, an expert in this position to like be able to like let go and trust people with the how is to like get over fear of like, will I lose my status? Will I lose, whatever, right? So just addressing that fear. No, it's a win.
I love the fact that we've gone from grow up and we've worked back, and we've got a story about the child walking along asking why it takes an hour to go one block on the street. And now we're talking about getting along, we're saying, and getting stuff done. We're going back to, actually, if you could be more childlike in your whys and your 5 whys, you might get to the answer and be more productive. But
I was just going to say, Colin, we should tell people just from a coaching perspective. So I'm always very careful to say you need to answer why questions, not ask them. So I know it's starting to get around there that the MRI research shows that when you ask someone a why question, you trigger defensiveness. You have an entire different neural process than you get at the same information asking like, tell me about your thought process. How are you thinking about this? Because for some reason, when we are asked a why question, we become defensive and we tend to manufacture an answer that's not necessarily very authentic. So we want to answer why questions, but we don't want to ask why questions. So we can accomplish the 5 whys, but new neuroscience says we shouldn't actually ask, but why?
Yeah. So it goes into the role of the leader to actually give a sense of direction as well from there, not actually defining the true direction. Good. Thank you, Liane, catching me in there. The 5 whys. So Ella, you were going to say something? Nope. Cool. Well, you're on mute, I think.
I also just noticed that the chat box and the question box are different. Yes. Sorry, Brian. So that's why I didn't find your question. I will now.
Okay. Do you want to go to that question now? Have you found it? See if it's got it in there.
Ooh, we can if it fits with your timing. So he asked,
go for it.
How does thinking with our head versus feeling with our heart versus intuition with our gut impact our level of being stuck and getting stuff done? And maybe that's just a theme that we can take kind of going forward. I have to say, I have to really thank you because this is part of my work is along with these questions these are the things that move us forward. Our basic tools, and the 3 that you named are what I consider our main processing tools, and they all process differently. And so I would just say that what has been really amazing about getting to work with so many different processes from adaptive leadership to design thinking to community organizing kind of work is that they each really tap into these different things and call on us to use all of them because they give us different things. And so a lot of times it's about shutting down our head, like brainstorming really quickly so that you don't have time to think, right? You have to work from your gut. And engaging, your emotions in a productive way, as Liane was kind of getting at before. Being able to know how to turn each one of those on will give us different answers. And I think it's really, really important. And I wonder if we might just, as we continue talking, call on head, heart, and gut.
I love that. I always just, as a quick joke, running a course, and about 3 days in, somebody said, gut feel. And this person in a second language had been thinking I'd been talking about goat feel for a while. I thought it was a quaint British custom that you had to feel a goat to make a decision. So it always sticks in my mind as a goat feel rather than gut feel. But yeah, Marcus, come back to you on that. So head, heart, and goat. Yeah,
goats. Yeah. No, I was thinking about this thinking as well now. But I usually, when I talk to teams, I usually ask them how they feel when we talk about where we are in a project or what is the situation. I always start there. And then a lot of people interpret it as kind of thinking, but it's still starting there because then you get, I'm really frustrated or I'm nervous about this. And then you can say, okay, what are you nervous about? And then you can start digging into those because then I think you're getting closer to a bit of what is the gut feeling. Instead of just having data for everything, you can say, okay, I'm nervous about this, and then we can explore that together. So I think it's very important to kind of start somewhere in the heart. But I never tried starting with the gut. I will try that next time. See, or the goat then.
I'm just starting to get into the whole idea of the soma and embodiment and all of those sorts of things. But I do think it's the next frontier for us of beneath what we're feeling to that, how are these things embodied in us, and what can we learn if we can be more tuned into that? Because I think most of us, in part of that, the first half of the arc of growing up, we've learned to ignore many of those things that our body is trying to tell us. And in the great unveiling, I think, that we have to then go through, I think, starting to tune back into those things we've been shutting out will be very interesting. And I'm a newbie at that, but I think there's a lot there that we can learn from.
I think it goes back to, is it thought, mind, and consciousness? There's that where our feelings are just a reflection of our thoughts in the moment, which allows you to therefore prep yourself to feel in the right way. But actually, a lot of people don't do it and work in there. So how we think about things. So let's go back to the mess. Tension between the mess and stuck. So getting stuck. We've got design team, we've got the innovators compass to get us out. How would you deal with a mess? Because going into an organization and saying, you're going to pay me to maintain the mess, is basically what you're saying, Marcus. I might be paraphrasing that, but
yeah. So maintain the mess is mostly about how do we deal with the mess on a regular basis, because things will change, our priorities will change, we will find out things that we didn't know, and then we need to deal with that. So I think it's about how do we deal with all of those changes constantly, instead of trying for the 10-year plan, as you talked about, Ella, that we can't do. And I don't think we can even do a 1-year plan. And I think what we need to focus on instead is kind of focusing on what are the goals, where are we heading right now, and then trying to adapt along the way. And for that, we need to start with feedback. We need to start talking more, discussing what is happening, but also kind of inviting all of these different perspectives in, so we can actually get feedback regularly on what we're trying to do, and also kind of from the outside. And I think this kind of sense making that we need to do all the time, I think very few people have the skills or the tools or experience in that. And it's a bit scary as well when you're trying to explain how complex things is right now. And we need to take step by step in realizing it's okay to get feedback, and it's not an attack on me if someone says I don't agree with you. So I think then we're going back to this grow up again. So realizing that we're trying to do all of this, it's back again that we need to practice getting and giving feedback. And that takes a bit of time for many people to get in, and not being perfect all the time, because if everything changes all the time, you can't be perfect.
And there isn't one.
No.
Right? What is perfect?
Exactly.
Not a singular notion. It does not exist.
Well, there's the definition of resilience has changed. I think, if I get it right, to being the ability to thrive in chaos is the new definition of resilience. Whereas used to be, it's almost like I'm going to be able to survive, but actually it's the thrive in chaos that's coming in there. So you're right on that. Bang on. Liane, in terms of this getting stuff done, and the head, the heart, and the guts and other things, what's your views and thoughts?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I'm working on at the moment is I've been talking about, I keep hearing about our workload is unmanageable, unreasonable. And so I don't buy that, actually, for the most part. But what I think is that organizations are failing, leaders are failing miserably at creating and managing attention and creating focus. So my work has shifted to this idea of the difference between workload and thought load. And what I'm much, much, much more worried about is how poorly we help people manage their thought load. So if workload is just the energy that it takes to complete the tasks you're expected to complete, I'm more interested in this thought load idea, which is about the energy it takes to manage all of the obligations and accountabilities that are weighing on you. And I think that's a much bigger problem in organizations right now. I think that's what's causing people's sense that they can't ever leave the office having made a meaningful dent in the pile. I think it's where a lot of friction is coming in interpersonal relationships because, you know, I'm fretting about how I'm dependent on you and will you let me down, or all these sorts of things. So I think the biggest get stuff done issue right now is really about managing attention, about getting away from this fallacy that we can, you know, do a million things at once. We can have 17 priorities. You know, whichever leader is putting out their 17 priorities never took Latin, because they certainly don't understand what a priority is. And so I think our biggest opportunity in getting stuff done is in creating, and to Marcus's point, creating little periods or phases of focus. So not about a year anymore, sometimes just about a week or even a morning where this is the single most important thing for you to pay attention to. So I think a lot of our productivity work needs to come back to managing thought load, helping people know what's the most important thing they could be paying attention to. And I would say this is the one that leaders are failing most profoundly at the moment. And the cost, not only to individuals, but to their families, to our society, is really worrisome.
It's interesting now because a lot of, you know, as a person who's Myers-Briggs P perceiving, and therefore hates to plan, and the thought of time boxing, which I saw in somebody's post recently about time boxing, I'm like, really structured time box, can't do this. But there's an odd thing that we need to be all prepared for our spontaneity session. We need to have structure and rigor in our lives, and we need to prioritize to get that. So I'm with you. I think it is that area that I struggle with. You know, how do I plan my day? I actually manage to plan my mornings, but my afternoons go to whatever I would say in here on a polite conversation. So I think there's something in there, but I'm resonating between getting out of stock and the mess, Marcus, because the mess and this managing this chaos that you were talking about, how do you get companies to work with that now? Yeah.
So I'm not going to answer your question, Colin. Sorry.
No, go for it. Nobody ever does. So just go with where you want to go. It's fine.
Because I'm thinking about this focus, because it so resonates with a lot of the work I do. And I think it might connect to your question as well. But I think on one level, it's this, what we talked about projects before. You're putting people into a project, they focus on one thing, because I think so many people are stuck in so many different assignments, topics. So this thought load, I like the term, Liane, is too much, because you're jumping between so many different contexts all the time. So I think this project idea of pushing people in, and I think that also, when you start saying that you can only be in one project at a time, that also forces the management to prioritize, because suddenly they're out of people. So, okay, we want to start this project, but who? Everyone are working on these simple projects. So then you need to stop another project or start up again or get more people. So I think that is one way of doing this. But the other one of the focus that you also brought up was this on a day-to-day basis. And there was an article quite a few years back who talked about the managers versus the makers schedule, which really resonated with me. This kind of, if you're a manager, you have this 1 hour slots, or many managers gone down to 30-minute slots over the day, and they put in everything. But a maker, you need about 4 hours. Then you can do something, you focus, and then you have another 4-hour slot. And then you come with a manager and sees, oh, so Liane, you have 4 hours in the afternoon. I'll put in half an hour in the middle, but then you break everything.
Oh, Marcus, you can see Ella and I. It's
always spontaneous.
Yeah.
So much agreement, just a one comment. It's great, Marcus.
And it's what we get wrong. And I was a manager. I ran a P&L in a consulting firm for a while, and I realized those half an hour slots were killing me. And I stepped out of that leadership job to take a maker's job, because I was losing my nut trying to do that. So music to my ears, and sounds like Ella, you too.
Yeah, I think so much of that is trust as well as prioritization. So for myself, like, so I use this stuff in my own life, and I found that, so like one of the questions is, right, what matters most?
Yeah.
And having eyes on that prize, because you just can't have it all. But trusting that you can, so for me, some principles that accompany my daily life, and I think are like really well echoed at an organization level by what Marcus just described, is I like to alliterate. So pick what matters most overall, like try to see and like lay out, okay, pick, now I'm going to focus on this, and then be able to put other things that matter most, that's tomorrow, and this is the next day. Like to just give them a place and then be positive about the one I'm doing, right? I picked, right now I'm with my kids, or right now I am 100% in my book. Like, nope, no phone, no nothing. Nope, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to feel good about it so that I can be present. And then to like go further and like to make it powerful, not perfect, right? Like, so that's another way of like, maybe we don't have to work so long, right? It's powerful. I focus on what makes it most powerful, not all the little details. And just trusting that there's more than one way. Like, I think a lot of that pressure is not just like how many things you're doing, but the sense that, oh my God, I'm going to do it wrong. Or like, what are all these different people thinking about what I'm doing? And so if you can trust people to work on one thing, right, which is what the structural aspect that Marcus just described, but also to trust them to do it and how they do it. I think that will also reduce some of the mental and emotional load.
When something is good enough, Juliet Funt once said, yeah, when good enough is good enough. So we're coming to the end of our time. I would love to just go around and get your thoughts. I was going to try and do a question about focus and priority. If you had to pick one of the three that you think is the most important at the moment, but I'm going to go away from that. Just want to get your final thoughts from what you've heard today and what you listened to. If you had one thing to leave the audience with, what would it be? Just one thing to leave them. Could be for any of the buckets or anything we've talked about. What's the thing you've either learned or you think, yeah, this is the one key thing in my work at the moment? And I'll get a signal from you when you feel like you're ready, so I don't pick on somebody who isn't still thinking. Go for it, Liane. Sounds like a finger was up there.
Yeah, that was it was this finger, thankfully. So you know, I am going to be feasting all week on this idea of how, you know, growing up is as much about is an arc where we collect a bunch of things that serve us for various reasons. And then there is a moment where we need to jettison some of those. And so this second phase of maturation, that is a gift from Marcus and Ella to me. And so nice. Personally, and also in my work, I'm going to have a lot that I'm going to feast on that for quite a while, I know.
Watching LinkedIn community, here it comes.
Here
yeah,
it comes.
I love it. Here it comes. Love it. Who would like it? Marcus, do you want to go next?
Yeah, okay, two thoughts are spinning in my mind, and one was from Liane, was then answer why, not ask it. So that was, I really like that quote, and I never liked the 5 whys type of question because I realized, but I also like this kind of as a thinking for managers and leaders and saying, so, okay, you need to answer the why, otherwise people, and you can't ask it of the group in the cell. So I really like that. And the other one was gut feeling that you brought up, Ella, again. So thinking about how that connects into my work and how to incorporate that. So those are the two parts that are spinning in my mind at the moment.
Excellent. Ella?
Maybe I'll borrow the two. So one of them is building on both Liane and Marcus, just the, like Marcus talked about the difference between, like, for experts, doing, like, being on the team and coaching, right? And I think that was like just one really great example of seeing the potential in ourselves and in everybody else, and letting that let us pick, you know, what are we doing? How much are we doing? How much are we letting go of? Like, just to let that potential in people and in yourself, to believe in that too, but seeing it all to guide you. And then I have to briefly say on why. I know all the science about why, that we react to the word why. And maybe from all this conversation is also, kids ask that question for a reason, right? As do we, why it's the most important, right? It's at the center of Simon Sinek. It's so important. Why can't we hear that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is the cultural change that might actually make that possible one day? The humility to be like, it's okay to be questioned.
Yeah. I think it's the style of questioning. Yeah, I love that, because sometimes it's the why as a pure question is a jolt. I think terror is the model that was used a number of times for how people react to it. But actually, if you say, tell me why, yeah, it's got a softening to it. So I'm not just justifying why I said the 5 whys, because I hear it and I go, but I'm with you. There's a culture of questioning, and there's a culture of being open to ideas. Yeah, that is.
I think the 5 whys, we just need our, what's that about? Where did that come from? What's beneath that, right? Until we get to that world that we're all going to try and build, where we can be questioned without becoming defensive, we need to accomplish the answers to the 5 whys. We just need to be a little creative in how we get there.
I love that. We don't need an audience. We can just debate amongst ourselves for ages. Anybody still with us? Yeah, no, they are. That's great. All I'd love to say is, Marcus, Ella, Liane, thank you so much for being on here. As you say, we could have many different conversations and spend a lot of time on this, but appreciate you coming along and being part of this. And I suppose a final question for people, Marcus and Liane and Ella, where can people find you? Just it's a thought if you want to get in contact with you, any of the listeners. Marcus.
Either on LinkedIn or just through our website, incrediblemess.com. So I think that's the easiest. Thank you.
Love that title.
And thank you for bringing me along. This was a lot of fun and I've learned a lot.
Good. Ella.
You can find me at innovatorscompass.org. So you can go to the website, find that hashtag on Twitter. And I'm Ella, just ELA, at innovatorscompass.org.
Brilliant. And Liane, it's always a pleasure, but where would
so good, Colin. So LinkedIn or lianedavey.com, where you will find about 500 musings and articles on how to grow up, get along, and get stuff done.
Amazing. Thank you for the title. Thank you for the session. Thank you, folks, for joining in with us, and I'll welcome you back soon on another of our webinars. Thank you.